Hello, I'm Chris Flisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Flisher. Hello, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Flisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology, one of my favorite topics of all. And today I've got a great guest on. Her name is Arielle Guttman, and she's from the West Coast, and she's here to talk about her book, which we did in a earlier segment, but also we're going to talk about Venus star rising and the geometry of astrology. So welcome to Turning of the Wheel, Arielle. Great to see you.
Thank you, Chris. So nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm great. So happy that you were able to come and be here with us.
Yeah, thank you.
So when I was looking through your book, Venus Star Rising, I was amazed at the mathematical geometry behind the logic of the astrology. Now, I've always understood the logic of astrology. I've always understood that mathematics was a huge piece of it. But what fascinates me is, in particular, with Venus in particular as a planet, the sequence with which it rotates around in its orbit creates a mathematical precision that is used in almost every form of art. And I'd love to have you tell us a little bit more about that.
Okay. Well, Chris,
or nature, for that matter.
It fascinated me too.
Yeah.
Okay. So the five-pointed star of Venus is equivalent to a nautilus shell,
okay.
to a lot of seashells, but let's
so
say
maybe
the
we have a photo
nautilus.
of a nautilus. Can we see
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Okay.
And everybody will recognize the nautilus shell because it's an iconic image, and just as Venus is an iconic image, you know the painting by Botticelli of Venus, The Birth of Venus, where she's floating to the shore on a seashell.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that the mythology of Venus from Homer and Hesiod, The Birth of Venus, came floating to the shore on a shell, and then Botticelli painted it in 1500 or something. And then, but the real truth of it is Venus's orbit, which we didn't really prove scientifically until probably the 19th or 20th century, is that that orbit of Venus and Earth is equivalent to the same frequency mathematically as if you were to break down the proportions or the ratio of a nautilus shell. It is the same exact thing.
So this is the mathematical precision. This is a measurement.
Right.
1.6
right.
is the measurement.
Right. It's 1.6 because the orbit of Venus to Earth is 1.6. The orbit of Venus is 584 days. Earth is 365 days. And when you divide one by the other, you come up with the 1.6.
Got it.
And there's a lot of other 1.6 in the orbit around the star. The five-pointed star in 8 years makes 1.6. The musical scale makes 1.6, which Venus is really a part of. There are 5, or is it 8? 5 black keys and 8 white keys on a musical scale. There are all kinds of artists, designers, architects, mathematicians, creators, etc., photographers that use what you've probably heard of as the golden mean.
The golden mean, yeah, the golden mean, the golden ratio, and the golden section are all the same. It's that 1.6 measurement, which we see in almost every form of art. We see it in nature as well. We see it in pine cones, we see it in the nautilus shells, we see it in flower blossoms,
beehives,
any number of things have this. So this shows that there is a mathematical contingency, mathematical connection, logic to this same pattern, which is just amazing to me, which really sort of substantiates the fact that the universe really is a mathematical construct.
It's the unfolding. What I've come to see about it, because this is what Venus and this Earth dance is, it's the unfolding of organic life. Because the star itself is a fractal that reaches out and can create another star. It's like one star attracts another and they hook up, and then it attracts another and then another, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing, and it never ends. And so it's that It's that attraction magnetism principle that's present in it. It's the mating principle, the life-giving principle. Each star point of Venus takes 9.2 months from one to the next, and that's the human life
The gestation cycle.
development cycle.
Wow. So these things all connect, and I find that to be fascinating. And when Botticelli or any of the people who were designing these famous buildings and these pieces of art, they probably didn't recognize that, or maybe didn't know that that was based on the Fibonacci sequence, which is part of what determines the golden sequence and the golden section. But
Well, they knew it was something.
they knew it was something because it's
They didn't
present.
call it maybe Fibonacci until Fibonacci came along and really identified it.
Right.
But the Vitruvian Man was an image that Leonardo da Vinci brought back
And that's
in the
basically the way
Renaissance.
we look if we stand with our arms out and our legs out. That's what's called
Yeah.
Vitruvian Man.
Right,
That's the symbol
right.
that you see in all those old architecture books
Exactly.
of Leonardo da Vinci.
Because the body, the human body, is all made out of phi ratio, and that's what Leonardo da Vinci was fascinated with, the human body. And so he would measure like the ratio between the hand and the whole arm, or this part of the arm up to the shoulder, or between the lips and to the whole forehead. And I mean, he had broke it down into so many different ways, but it all came down to that 0.6 or 1.6, which was this perfect harmony. So the human being is actually a part of this five-pointed star, you know.
And what I love about it is that there's this point in time where these are all smaller components, like you mentioned, of the arm, the hand to the arm is a 1.6. And then you
Right.
take the arm to the rest of the body, it's 1.6. So this is a formula that keeps recurring throughout all of nature. And it's tied to the transit and the cycle of Venus, the planet, which is the planet that represents beauty in astrology.
Right.
Which is just fascinating. It's a startlingly accurate,
Right.
precise point that just, if you don't believe in astrology, this will make you believe in astrology because the precision is so crisp, you can't deny it.
And then I realized, as working with this five-pointed man or woman star, Vitruvian figure, Venus figure now, is that so we have our arms outstretched, and we have our legs, and we have our head, but at the end of each of those is 5 fingers on each arm, 5 toes on each leg, and 5 senses. So there's again the fractal of the 5, and then more 5, and then who knows what else,
Right.
how that radiates out into the universe.
It does speak to a master plan, if nothing else.
Yes, right.
As if there's
right.
somebody is in charge here who has a master plan, depending upon your persuasion in that regard. But I find it to be fascinating because it has such that great precision. And you mentioned the word phi before, P-H-I. That is the Greek word, or is it the Greek word for the golden mean, or the golden ratio, or the golden section? So golden ratio, golden mean, golden section are all the same. It's all just different words.
Right.
But it refers to that 1.6 sequence of the Fibonacci numbers.
Right. Phi is a Greek letter,
Yes,
but
it
it's
is.
also a Greek number. We have a lot of words in English that have phi in it, but it's also a number, a value, a mathematical value, and it's also, I think, in the Greek alphabet, there are, you know, the letters of the Greek alphabet actually are not just letters. They all have, there's an energy frequency. They're frequencies.
Right.
So they mean more than just...
They have a harmonic quality.
Right,
Yes.
exactly. And I think the Hebrew alphabet is like this too. Like if people that have studied the Kabbalah, you know, each of these letters that represent the different pathways or gates or portals or whatever are energy centers. So there's a lot of ancient knowledge that was already embedded in certain things that just in our modern times we've kind of let go and forgotten about. But I think now we're able to go back to looking at some of these things because we have the computer technology and the scientific abilities to study things in much more minute detail.
Yeah,
than
that
we
makes
ever
a huge
have.
difference. And I think that when we recognize this, we really get to that point where I was mentioning earlier that there is a logic to all of this, to the universe, which is stunning because it just brings into play so much of, it explains so many things, I think.
Right.
having that explanation, I think, really gives me, you know, it gives me reason to live, I think. It's very heartening to have that kind of knowledge out there.
I think it's also why we love Venus so much, because it is that, because if that value really does speak to something called harmony, a principle called harmony, don't we all want to be harmonious?
That would be the goal, yes.
I mean, don't we want to live in a harmonious world?
Yeah.
Don't we want to be peaceful in our lives? Don't we want to feel like we're in the flow?
Absolutely, we do.
It's also that frequency is the frequency of synchronicity. You know how you always say, gee, I can't believe that happened. Just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Or
what we call coincidence. But
right.
Coincidence is really synchronicity.
It's really synchronicity.
And synchronicity, in a sort of a summing up phrase, is when events occur that seem implausible or seem unlikely to have occurred, because they're like, how did that happen?
Right.
And boom, it's there, right?
Right, exactly.
And that is, and Carl Jung did a great deal of work on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of an intersection. It's an intersection of you at a certain point in time and space where you get to that intersection where that kind of thing happens. But if you look again at that figure of the nautilus shell, and that's the Fibonacci sequence, and maybe to explain that to your audience, I mean, a lot of people have heard of the Fibonacci sequence, but they don't really know what it is. Okay, it was defined by a man named Fibonacci, but what it's based on is just a simple set of numbers. You start with 0, and you go to the next value, which is 1, okay? And then you add 0 and 1 together, and you get 2. And you add 1 and 2 together, you get 3. So you're always looking behind you at the last number that you were just at, and add yourself to that, and you create the next number. So then the sequence goes to 5, 8, 13, 21,
and then
34.
when you plot those points on a graph, you start connecting them, you can see the same cycle occur.
Right, and I think we have a graphic that we've shown of that. Yeah, right.
Yeah, there you go. See,
there it is.
Yeah.
5, 8, 13, 21, 34. So that's the organic unfoldment of this particular seashell, but that's the Fibonacci sequence, and that has been identified with not only how nature works and how we grow as human beings and life cycles repeat and how we expand, but the whole evolutionary plan is that. So we're all spiraling out on that same sequence.
Right, exactly. And so, and one of the things about astrology, which I always find interesting, is that we are always, history does repeat itself. We do have these cycles that recur, and we see them recurring. What happens is that they recur at a different place in time. So it's like a giant helios or a corkscrew, where an event will happen, and then they'll go around, as time moves forward, it's going in a circular time motion like that. Events will reoccur, not at the same place, at the same time, but not in the same place. And when the place changes, all the circumstances change. So we can see this in history. When they say history repeats itself, this is what they're referring to.
It does, yes. But I think the fascinating thing for me about discovering that sequence and connecting it to Venus was that, again, it synced me up and my life up. I like to follow the rhythm of Venus in my own life. Every 9.2 months, it changes star points, which means it's usually going from a yin sign to a yang, or a yin phase to a yang, and so it's the heartbeat of the cosmos. It's really, so being in sync with that, like what element is it in, what. You know, we go from Gemini, more recently we went from Gemini as an evening star to Aries as a morning star. And then it'll go to Capricorn as an evening star. So when that happens,
it brings along the attributes of that sign that it's in. So if you're in an Aries sign, you're being very aggressive, you're being activated.
Well, the whole world is kind of operating under that. You know, we have the planets operating all the time, and everybody's looking at the planets and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. But in the background, behind the planets, we have this very slow-moving Venus clock that is just kind of ticking away, a very slow mechanism that's moving in the background. And every now and then, again, principle of synchronicity, it syncs up with where a planet is, or was it a very important point in your own chart? And it allows that feeling of, wow, I was in the right place at the right time to have these circumstances
And that
happen.
works in both good and bad, you could say. I suppose there are probably times that people wonder that they're in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yes,
Of course.
exactly.
But I think being in tune with this and knowing where these points are in your life allows you to be more cognizant. I think people have to be, I've always found that if you're more attuned to the possibility of synchronicity, that they are more likely to occur. I think that we are not always aware of them sometimes, and the types of events that can happen through synchronicity may appear to be minor, but they actually are implore a larger meaning behind them. Mm-hmm. Don't you think there seems to be? And I think that you have to have a little antenna up that says, looking for synchronistic events, and then when they occur, they're just phenomenal.
And then we want more. It's kind of like, okay, I liked that. Do that again. Hit me with that one again.
Right, exactly. I mean, it really is a fascinating. If anybody's ever had you'll know what a synchronistic event is. It is. I always give the example. Supposing you're at a party and you meet somebody and they talking about a book or whatever you recommend. You make a mental note of the book and then you disappear and you go across country to a different part of the world. And then somebody who you've never met before mentions the same book and you say, "Wow, that's a synchronistic event." Two different people. I always think it has to be two extraneous sequences or events that come together and boom to create the synchronistic event. You pay attention. That's a very simplistic idea, my example rather, very simplistic example, but still it does give the idea of coincidence. Coincidences are good things to have happen, typically. They're on.
Or I like the rule of three with synchronicity. You're reading a book, and this has happened to me a few times. I'm reading a passage in a book, and the next day I find myself in a very, almost playing out the same scene in my life that I just read about in the book the night before. And then a third thing happens where I'm someplace else and somebody mentions, oh, my friend was telling me they were reading this book, and it's the same book you just read and that you just played out, and now you've heard it a third time, and then you have to wonder, wait a minute.
Right. And when they happen, they are thrilling. They are very thrilling.
Right.
And that, you think, is also tied to the Fibonacci number and this sort of this sequence of events and times, and it's sort of that clock-like precision of these.
Yeah, and the Venus star is attuned to that cycle. Yeah. I know that people that work in the financial markets use the Fibonacci sequence of numbers because they have determined that the markets work that way. Because if organic life,
a good tip.
well, yeah, if you know how to use it. I mean, if organic life works that way, if we grow and expand, and if rivers flow in and forests grow in and leaves on a tree and flowers unfold and bloom in that phi ratio pattern or Fibonacci sequence, then it really is organic life.
Right. So what would you use for the determining factors for that? When would you say the beginning is, and then a year and 1.6 later it will occur? What would you use for some sort of a major beginning or a demarcation of some sort, like a?
Well, in Venus's case, it is every 1.6 years, and that is phi. I mean, that simply is phi.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, what would be the determining factor? What determines the
Venus?
start?
Well, when Venus begins to go retrograde, which she does every 1.6 years, she is slowing down in her orbit, and now at the middle part of the retrograde, like halfway between the beginning and end of the retrograde, she meets with Earth in an exact conjunction or very close conjunction called Cazimi to create a star point. And at that point, the seed is planted for the beginning of that 1.6 year cycle that will take you to the next 1.6 years.
So it's the Cazimi that is the secret. That's
the Cazimi.
That's the beginning point, which is
I
when
think so.
The Sun and Venus are exactly aligned.
From my research, I mean, I think that it's possible that other people will tell you that it's at the beginning of the retrograde or it's at another point in time, because it doesn't really matter where you measure it from. Do you know the author Greg Braden? Have you ever read
I
any
have
of
not,
his
no.
books?
Doesn't
Okay.
ring a bell.
So he wrote something on called Fractal Time, which is a beautiful book, and he talked about Venus in the 1.6 cycle, but he was actually suggesting that you can take any important event in your life that's happened, like take the most important, most extraordinary event of your life, and figure out exactly how old you were, how many years, how many months. And then you can add a 1.6 equivalent to it, and you're likely to get another really big important event 1.6 from that.
Wow.
And then you keep going 1.6 from that.
So
it does keep
584
expanding.
584
It's
days.
not always 584, but based on that graphic you were showing earlier of the numbers, remember the 5, the 8, the 13, and there it is, the 21. Right. So when you're looking at those numbers, he's got the instructions in the book. I can't tell you, he wasn't timing it exactly from Venus retrograde to Venus retrograde the way that I do. So it works in a lot of different ways. This Venus synchronization mechanism is finely tuned like the most incredibly programmed Swiss clock. It is so precise. It's measuring on different levels. And now I'm calling it actually the Venus clock. This Venus star, when I first got all this information and wrote it down, it still is a Venus star because it's a 5-pointed star. But the way it moves it is like a slow-moving clock working in the backdrop of our life.
Always clicking away. And those synchronistic events, I think, are important. So I think knowing these points in an individual astrology chart in your own personal life is relevant because it can be moments of great decisions, moments of great progress, moments of great discovery, moments of great creativity. And to be cognizant of them, I think would be really helpful. And that's what you do. You do your Venus star rising sign readings. You'll get that sort of information. So people would get that information from Arielle based on their particular birth time, because there are moments when you're going to have these points hitting. Now, an interesting point I want to make is, or ask about, is when you do this, does where we are in the world have a specific attribute to your own personal chart? So if you are in a Venus star, you have your Venus star chart, and a point comes up where the sun goes over that, or a major planet goes over that point, is it activated in that? It is. Okay, interesting.
Yes. So, for instance, maybe you'll look at your birth chart and you'll say, well, I don't really have all, points connecting these different points of the star. I don't have planets in those particular points. But hey, if you live to a certain age, you're likely, I've seen this over and over again, you're likely to have the star hit not just one planet, but 2 points of the star hit 2 planets at the exact same time in your life. Or sometimes with people, 3 points. And I'll get to that part of their life when I'll say, gee, the Capricorn star was hitting your Jupiter, and the Aries star was hitting your Mercury, and the Gemini star was hitting your Venus, or your Sun, let's say, and something must have really taken place, and that's in an 8-year period, because the pentagram of Venus, those degrees are usually good for about 8 years. And I'll say something like, wow, this must have been in a really big time of your life, very incredible that you would have 3 hits on the star in this particular few-year period. And that's usually the response is, oh yes, everything happened in my life at that time that influenced my life, that put me on the road that I'm on now, that changed everything for me.
Wow, that's fascinating. And you can tie that back to the date and see exactly when it was. When you think of someone like, you mentioned Oprah earlier, when you think of someone like Oprah, obviously she's a hard-working individual, but a lot of what happened to her you think is based on her alignment of this Cazimi in her chart, whereby she was sort of gifted with this sort of destiny of sorts, would you call it? Or?
I would call it a destiny, for sure. She was born at that Venus Cazimi, very powerful in Aquarius. She has been the queen of the airwaves. She's broken and surpassed every record on the books for, not
and the
just
odds
women.
The odds were stacked against her. I mean, being a woman, being a
Exactly.
black woman,
from a poor part of the country in the South, that she didn't really have any advantages, special advantages or opportunities when she was growing up. This was her talent, what she came in with at birth, her destiny, you could call it. But there it was, Sun, Venus, and the Venus star point, the Triple Crown, all lined up at 9 degrees Aquarius at the time of her birth. And there are similar figures to that I've looked at that maybe had better advantages growing up, but still became, just shot into the stratosphere of, incredible talent.
It does make you wonder. I mean, you have to stop and think about, we all know that astrology is about timing, obviously, and that's the basis of the whole astrological concept. But when you see someone such as she, you can't help but wonder, what was at work here? I mean, she obviously had to do her work, but she really was at the right place at the right time.
Well, we're all doing our work. We're all hardworking in the sense of things, but then you think, okay, but she really did that.
So another person born at the same time.
As her? Well, you know what's interesting? Exactly 4 years later, when the Venus Cazimi came back to Aquarius, and almost on the same date, maybe a couple days later, but 4 years later, on that Cazimi, Ellen DeGeneres was born.
Interesting.
Who's another major media presence.
Very interesting.
And both of them broke major records. I mean, when you think about the fact that it was Aquarius, it wasn't just that they were women and they broke through a lot of glass ceilings in the broadcasting, Oprah for sure, in the broadcasting industry and talk shows and all of that, and media empire that she's inherited. But Ellen had a similar kind of leadership quality breakthrough when she openly announced that she was gay. She was the first major TV personality to announce that. And I think maybe at first it didn't really exactly work in her favor. Maybe there was, some backlash to that. But it didn't take long for her realizing that, coming out with who her real self, who she was. Now, the difference between Oprah and Ellen is that Oprah is an evening star and Ellen is a morning star. And I often use this example when I'm talking about it, because morning and evening are running on they have almost two different types of machines that are driving them.
That makes perfect sense because of the timing and where they were born. And so, but the fact that the two of them, and of course the 4 and the 4 makes the 8, which gives you that same cycle, that is phenomenal to me. I didn't realize that about Ellen. That is really a perfect example of what it would be, that same mathematical precision. Wow, that is amazing. We've been talking today with Arielle Guttman. She's the author of Venus Star Rising. We had her on earlier to talk about the particular Venus Star Rising as well. But more importantly, we were talking about the logic and the geometry of the universe, much of which is explained in this book, Venus Star Rising. I encourage you to look up her website, which is on the screen up there. We'll see her name come up. And she can do a fascinating reading and show you where your Venus star points are in your life. And hopefully you can use them to your great advantage. I think you'll find creative people have this, as you mentioned. I think Oprah and Ellen DeGeneres are fascinating examples of that. So it's been really
there's
great.
hundreds of others.
Sure
I just, at the top of my head, I'm like,
it's been great to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right.
Thank you.